Menglong, when truth collides with power. Truth rarely arrives like thunder. Sometimes, it walks into the room quietly, unannounced, unarmed, only to find itself standing face to face with power that has already decided what will be heard, what will be remembered, and what will be buried. That was the collision. And at its center stood the name Menglong. The day the story changed shape. There was a moment, small, almost invisible, when the narrative stopped moving forward and began to fold inward. It wasn't marked by sirens or breaking news banners. It happened in language, in pauses, in carefully chosen words that replaced certainty with caution. Where clarity once seemed possible, ambiguity settled in like fog. That's how you know truth has met power. Not with violence, with restraint. The two forces that never meet as equals. Truth is fragile by nature. It relies on openness, sequence, light. It asks uncomfortable questions and waits patiently for honest answers. Power is different. Power controls timing. Power controls access. Power decides which truths are premature, which are misunderstood, and which are simply unnecessary. When the two collide, truth doesn't usually shatter. It slows. And that slowing is exactly what people began to feel as Menglong's story unfolded. A presence that didn't fit the system. Before his name became attached to questions, Menglong was known for something quieter, steadiness. He wasn't the loudest in the room. He didn't chase spectacle. His work carried restraint, a kind of sincerity that didn't beg to be noticed. Ironically, that same quality made his absence impossible to ignore. Because when someone who doesn't thrive on noise disappears into silence, the quiet feels wrong. The first fracture, when answers didn't align. In the early stages, people believed the truth would reveal itself through process. Evidence would align. Timelines would clarify. Official language would converge toward resolution. Instead, something else happened. Statements grew narrower. Explanations became technical. Questions were answered without actually being addressed. This wasn't deception in the dramatic sense. It was containment. And containment is one of power's oldest tools. The invisible wall. Those watching from the outside sensed it before they could name it. The feeling of pressing against glass. Of seeing movement without access. Of being close to understanding, but never close enough to touch it. Truth was present, but buffered. Filtered through procedure. Through hierarchy. Through authority that insisted calm was the same thing as clarity. It isn't. When silence becomes a strategy, silence is often mistaken for neutrality. In reality, silence is rarely empty. In cases where power is involved, silence becomes strategic, not to erase truth, but to outlast it. To wait until attention fades. Until urgency dulls. Until questions feel old. But Menglong's story didn't fade. Because silence doesn't end curiosity. It sharpens it. The public's role in the collision. What made this collision different was not outrage, it was persistence.
People didn't riot.
They didn't sensationalize. They didn't demand instant answers. They waited. They reread statements. They noticed changes in wording. They compared what was said with what wasn't. This wasn't hysteria. It was collective awareness. And awareness is dangerous to unchecked power. Power's greatest miscalculation. Power often assumes memory is short, that people will move on, that time will smooth uncertainty into indifference. But it misjudged one thing. Menglong wasn't remembered for scandal. He was remembered for integrity. And integrity creates loyalty. Not the loud kind, but the enduring kind. The kind that doesn't forget just because it's told to be patient. Truth doesn't always need a voice. Here's the paradox power often overlooks. Truth doesn't need to shout to survive. It lingers in inconsistencies, in unanswered questions, in the discomfort people feel when explanations don't quite fit. It survives in the space between statements, in the pauses no one explains, in the sense that something important remains unresolved. Menglong's truth lives there now, not fully visible, not erased, waiting. The cost of containment. When power contains truth, it doesn't eliminate it. It displaces it, into rumor, into speculation, into doubt. And that displacement carries a cost. Trust erodes. Institutions weaken. Official narratives lose weight. Because people can accept hard truths. What they struggle to accept is managed uncertainty, a name that refuses to settle. Menglong's name has become something more than a case. It has become a symbol of friction between what people are told and what they sense, between official calm and emotional unrest, between authority and accountability. His story refuses to settle neatly into a conclusion because it was never allowed to unfold freely. And stories constrained by power don't end. They persist. The collision isn't over. Truth and power don't collide once. They collide repeatedly. Every time a question is asked and deflected, every time clarity is promised but postponed, every time silence is mistaken for resolution. The collision surrounding menglong continues not because people are unwilling to let go, but because there is nothing solid yet to let go of. Final scene, where truth waits. Imagine a light behind a wall, not extinguished, not dimmed, just obstructed. You can't see the source, but you know it's there because the edges glow. That is where truth stands now, waiting for the moment power loosens its grip, waiting for space, waiting for courage. Until then, menglong's story remains unfinished, not as a failure of truth, but as proof that when truth collides with power, it doesn't disappear. It endures, quietly,
Stubbornly.
and inevitably. When the collision echoes, power tightens, truth adapts. After the first impact, the collision didn't end. It echoed, not as noise, but as pressure. The kind you feel in your chest when a room grows too quiet, when every word is weighed before it's spoken, when everyone knows the line exists even if no one points to it. This was the phase where power adjusted its grip. The corridor with no windows. Behind the scenes, the story moved into corridors without windows, places defined not by what happened there, but by what didn't. Conversations shortened. Doors closed faster. Explanations became procedural, stripped of emotion, polished until they reflected nothing back. Truth was still present, but it had been asked to wait. And waiting, in systems built on authority, is not neutral. Waiting is a test of patience, of endurance, of whether curiosity will outlast fatigue. How power learns to look calm. Power rarely panics. It slows the tempo. It lowers the volume. It repeats the same phrases until familiarity dulls their edges. We are reviewing. We are following procedure. We ask for understanding. Each sentence sounded reasonable. Together, they formed a wall, smooth, polite, nearly invisible. Truth doesn't break walls like this. It seeps. The return of the unanswered. Even as statements tried to settle the surface, unresolved questions resurfaced elsewhere. Quietly, persistently, like a tide that refuses to obey the moon. Why did explanations shift in tone? Why did clarity retreat just as scrutiny sharpened? Why did every answer feel technically complete, but emotionally hollow? People didn't shout these questions. They carried them. And carried questions are harder to silence than loud ones. The power of remembering. What power underestimated was an outrage. It was memory. Menglong's name didn't circulate because of spectacle. It stayed because it was anchored to something deeper: consistency, restraint, sincerity. The kind of reputation that doesn't depend on headlines to survive. So, when the story lost momentum on paper, it gained gravity in people's minds. They remembered how certainty once felt close. They remembered when explanations felt possible. They noticed when that possibility slipped away. Truth learns new shapes. When blocked from direct paths, truth adapts. It moves sideways, into analysis, into comparison, into the spaces between official words. It appears in the way people reread statements and notice what changed. In the way they circle back to early promises and measure the distance traveled since. Truth doesn't need permission to exist. It only needs attention. And attention, once focused, is difficult to redirect. The quiet tension that doesn't fade. The collision created a tension that didn't resolve into drama or decay. It stabilized. Like a held breath, power maintained its posture, composed, controlled, confident in time's ability to soften edges. Truth, meanwhile, settled into persistence, patient, unspectacular, unwilling to vanish. Neither side advanced. Neither side retreated. This was stalemate. When authority misreads silence. Power often mistakes silence for acceptance. But silence can also be listening, watching, recording. People didn't demand conclusions anymore. They watched how power behaved without pressure, how it moved when it believed the moment had passed. That's when patterns become visible. And patterns are where truth hides best. Menglong as the unmovable center. At the heart of this standoff remained a single constant, his name. It didn't inflate into myth. It didn't dissolve into abstraction. It stayed specific, grounded. A reminder that this wasn't about abstract forces colliding in theory. It was about a real person, a real story, and a truth that mattered because it belonged to someone who could no longer speak for himself. That specificity made forgetting impossible. The cost of prolonged collision. When truth and power remain locked, something else erodes.
Trust.
Not suddenly, not dramatically, gradually. People begin to listen differently, to read more carefully, to believe less easily. Authority retains control, but loses confidence it once commanded effortlessly. This is the quiet cost of containment. The light still presses through. Truth, obstructed, becomes pressure. It presses at edges, at seams, at the moments where language falters and repetition replaces explanation. You don't see it clearly yet, but you feel it. That's how you know the collision isn't over. Final scene, the unfinished motion. Imagine two forces locked together, not exploding, not retreating, just holding. One relying on structure, the other on endurance. Power waits for time. Truth waits for space. And somewhere in between, Menglong's story continues to exist, not concluded, not erased, but insistent. Because when truth collides with power, the outcome isn't decided in a single moment. It's decided by who can last longer without letting go. And truth is very patient.